So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to submit those in the questions panel. We'll save some time at the end of Josh's presentation to answer all of those. We're also recording the webinar today. We'll post that on the Okapi website within the next 24 hours or so. With that, we're thrilled to have Josh Kell joining us today. Josh is the VP of Digital and Brand Marketing for the Switch Agency. Switch is based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and is one of the most respected experiential marketing agencies in the country, who also happens to be one of Okapi's agency partners. With over 35 years in the industry, Switch provides their clients with a full suite of services, including field and mobile marketing, meeting events and environments, digital, VR, and content, as well as brand marketing. Personally, Josh has over 19 years of experience working with top-tier agencies and experiential marketing programs. Some of Josh's most prominent clients have been AB InBev, Gatorade, NASCAR, FedEx, and Coca-Cola. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
Wow, it's quite an intro. Thank you very much. Today, what we're going to be covering is digital media versus experiential, and going into a couple different facets of it, from how to measure them, which one you should be spending your budget on, and really kind of what are the differences between the two. Going through it in order kind of in the presentation, we're going to talk through really just the differences of those two types of activations, online versus in person, and then get into measurement. How can we measure? Is it possible to measure? How you can tell the difference between the two of them? And then obviously I'll finish with kind of a conclusion and some of the key takeaways from the presentation. So, famous kind of proverb, I think this has been used by every experiential agency out there, but I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And that's one of the things we're definitely going to focus on today, kind of that experiential side of marketing and getting people to really interact with your product and the benefit that that can definitely come back with. This page, again, just kind of talking through consumers' lives, and where do you meet consumers? Do you meet them online? Do you meet them on TV? Do you meet them in person? And really the answer has become you have to meet them everywhere, that their lives are becoming very blurred and very blended. They no longer just go online and then go somewhere in person. Even if they're with you in person, they tend to be kind of online anyway through their phone. So really, one of the things we're going to look at is how can you meet them at all of those places with your marketing messaging. Getting into consumer psychology, problem with online advertising, it's always been seen as this noisy annoyance, right? So it kind of gets in the way of what you're doing. It's a interruptive type of media. One of the things that we really practice here is that we want to kind of become the brand in the event that you're interested in and not interrupt the things that you're already interested in. And that's really what online media does. It interrupts you. It stops you from kind of seeing and doing what it is you went there to do. There was an MIT study that actually went really deep into kind of the online advertising and how people feel about it. And really the biggest takeaway was that it's super obtrusive, and that even when you're using targeting, it still felt obtrusive. I think that a lot of people would assume that because you can target so digital media, that it no longer feels interruptive. And actually, it has the opposite effect. It feels even creepier. So not only are you interrupting what people are doing, but now you're giving them a message that shows that you clearly have been following them and monitoring what they're doing online. And so actually it becomes a really big turnoff. If you look at kind of what Google has done, with AdSense and AdWords, that's been a little bit more unobtrusive. And that's actually why that's become more effective. It doesn't feel like it's actually getting in the way of what you're doing. It actually adds to what you're doing. So if you're doing a search function and an ad technically pops up at the top of that search, it's actually beneficial because chances are it's what you were actually looking for to begin with. So that's an example of using digital media in a way that doesn't interrupt what you're doing, but actually benefits and kind of helps out with what you're searching. Another one of the problems is the idea of this kind of leeriness and indifference. A lot of skepticism that people have towards online media. Forrester did a big study about 5 years ago or so, doing a lot of kind of interviews and really seeing how people are interacting online. And Simmons did a similar study as well. And what they both kind of came back with is people just don't trust online advertising. In a lot of ways, they don't trust messaging at all from brands in advertising, whether, again, that's online, on TV, in magazines. People have just, kind of grown tired of those types of ad messages. They know they're being marketed to, and so they've kind of stopped trusting those messages. And one of the issues with the metrics of online advertising is they're just not very reliable. Several studies have been done on this, but when it really gets into it, click-through rate is really, really low, right? If you're getting click-through rates of like 1%, you know, that's actually a great thing. And if you think about 1% and how low that is, the fact that you'd be celebrating 1% click-through rate just seems kind of counterintuitive. And on top of that, just kind of the viewability of the ads is always up for debate and up for discussion. So when you're talking about an impression, for example, how do you really measure that? How long did someone actually view your banner? If you have a display ad on a page and someone happens to be reading something on that page, that's considered an impression, but it doesn't mean someone actually saw that display ad. So again, the way that they're even tracking some of that stuff isn't very reliable. So as media companies are reporting those metrics back to their clients, you know, I think there's, again, some of that kind of leeriness of, you know, are these facts really beneficial? Are these facts really true? And, you know, am I getting kind of what I pay for? So getting into experiential, you know, what we believe, and obviously what a lot of research I'm going to take you through has found as well, is that if you want to make a good impression, it's critical that it's done in person, that face-to-face interaction that brand has with the consumer, with a shopper, with a customer, becomes so much more impactful than an impersonal interaction, which is what traditional advertising tends to be. It's a very impersonal interaction. So, you know, getting into kind of that idea of a first impression, the idea of, you know, one chance to make that first impression, how important it is, really kind of touches on to why experiential becomes so powerful. So again, we consider kind of an interaction, that face-to-face engagement, whether that is, you know, a lot of people at a concert that still feels like it's a very impersonal or, you know, in-person type of activity, or a brand ambassador talking one-on-one with someone at a footprint, taking them through a product demonstration, letting them sample the product. We consider all those face-to-face interactions. And again, that is the time to make a first impression for a brand. A lot of research has discovered is that when people have that face-to-face interaction, they actually have a much more positive feeling towards a brand. And they actually did a study where they showed a face-to-face interaction with the brand, then also showed videos online, and they showed them again on YouTube and also through Facebook, where when people watched the videos, it felt like a face-to-face interaction, so it's definitely more positive than a traditional display ad. But when those videos were compared to a face-to-face interaction from an experiential sense, what they found is that the positive attributes to the video were actually lower, and that there's a lot more negative feelings toward those videos versus the face-to-face interaction. Again, that just gets back to the trust issue. That if you're viewing something online, it feels like marketing, it feels like advertising, and so you're leery of whether or not you can really trust that message. And when you're in person, again, you're talking to another human being most of the time. And so you feel like you can really trust those people and really engage in that conversation. And that's, again, why that first impression with experiential becomes so important. You know, we look at, again, the idea of like a CTA versus CTI. So traditional advertising has a, you know, CTA, a call to action. They want you to do something, whether it's click here or buy now. With experiential, we believe in that call to interaction, that idea of actually participating with the brand and having like a true two-way conversation. A lot of people talk about social media as being a two-way conversation because you can comment on posts and brands may get back to you based on your comments. But really, a true two-way conversation happens in person with two voices exchanging a conversation. And that's really what, you know, we look to do when we're doing experiential events, is having that interaction between people. Eventtrack did a survey about 3 years ago, and the numbers are pretty staggering as far as, you know, what people do once they have that face-to-face interaction. So you can see that 80% of respondents actually brought products or services after they sampled them. So this gets back to, we do a lot of sampling. Again, sampling in store, sampling at events, sampling as part of a kind of a national or regional based tour. And when you give people that product to either taste the product, interact with the product, if you're using power tools, you know, to use the actual drill itself. Again, when you're using those kind of product demos, that product sampling, 80% of people, you know, are more likely to buy it, and they have more positive feelings towards it. 57% even, you know, said they actually understood the product, and that's, again, one of the differences between advertising and experiential. You know, with advertising, it's hard to get someone who really understands that product because the time that you have to give them the message becomes so limited. If you're looking at a TV ad, you've got 15 to 30 seconds to kind of deliver information, and that's just not very much time. And it's even less if you're looking at social media. As people are scrolling through their feeds and you know, using their thumb as quickly as possible, you barely have any time to deliver a message. With experiential, people have already chosen to be there. They've chosen to give you their time, and so they're willing to listen longer than 30 seconds. So that, you know, allows them to have a much better understanding of your product and of your service. And that's, again, one of the big values of experiential. Another report from EventTrack in 2014, and this one is pretty big for us. It's the idea of understanding a brand's product or service. And actually, if you look deeper into the survey, that understanding of a brand's product service is kind of two different understandings. One of them is the understanding of what the brand stands for, so that kind of brand personality, if you will. And the other understanding is the actual product and kind of what the product does, those features and benefits of the product. And so that was something that was really powerful with Experiential, is getting to tap into both of those areas. Traditional advertising typically just touches on the first. It's about kind of creating feelings and creating emotion, creating affinity for the brand, and really showing how the brand's personality comes to life, so you know what the brand stands for. But you don't necessarily get into features and benefits as much through regular advertising. And with Experiential, you're able to do that. You're able to have an event that shows off the brand's personality and what that brand stands for, but then also give people a chance to touch and feel products, right? So they understand what those products are, what those services are, how they work, and how it benefits them. So it's able to do certainly both of those things. Getting into informative engagement, again, experiential marketing ranked just as kind of the most powerful, form of marketing. So those, again, in-person kind of interactions. If you look at just some of the stats there, 4 out of 5 indicating experiential marketing did these things for them. It's an engaging way to receive a communication. It's the most likely one that will actually give them information that they retain. It's something they tell others about. This one is huge in the era of social media, and creating events that are shareable, so that, if 100 people are at an event, if you create something that's very shareable and they want to post about it on social media, suddenly those 100 people and your event has now reached thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people, just because they want to share that experience with others. So that idea of word of mouth has become so much more important even than it was 15 years ago. 15 years ago, word of mouth was certainly important, so that one friend would tell another friend, but again, that game of telephone works very slowly. With social media, it's almost instantaneous. So if you have an event in Omaha, people in New York may know about it, see about it in real time because they've got friends who are posting from there. So experiential is something that really brings that to life in a way that other mediums don't. And people are more receptive to having those experiences. Again, when you're hosting an event and someone walks into that footprint, that's them voluntarily saying, hey, I'm willing to give you some of my time. So that they're raising their hand to say, please talk to me, please tell me something about yourself. And it's really important that brands don't take that for granted, that they treat that engagement, that interaction, that, again, first impression very delicately, and make sure that they don't waste that opportunity. So we're going to transition here, again, and a little bit more kind of deep on the experiential side and kind of the power of those interactions and what they really can bring out of people as far as the feelings and that affinity you can create to a brand. There's a quote that I love from Douglas Ampratt. The human brain exists primarily for movement. Organisms don't move, don't have brains. Let me read that again. The human brain exists primarily for movement. Organisms that don't move don't have brains. We are more like human doings than we are human beings. There's another quote that's not included in here that I've always loved as well, that people assume human beings are thinking creatures that feel, and that's really not right, that we are feeling creatures that think, that we always lead with our hearts and not with our heads. And so brands need to really, tap into that knowledge, the idea of how can create feelings with people, tap into those hearts in order to get a message into their heads. And that's, again, what Experiential does so well. It kind of taps into what people feel and what people want. And then you can deliver a message that makes them kind of think and retain that information about your brand. Again, the quote I just read, he actually wrote a book called Unconscious Branding, How Neuroscience Can Empower and Inspire Marketing. And so these are just some of the takeaways from him. And really the most obvious one is that we learn best by doing. That when people get to interact with the brand, they get to actually do something, move their arms, move their legs, have that kind of repetitive motion that in their subconscious kind of gets embedded long term. So when you're delivering a message through advertising, that message probably isn't noticed. It's certainly not retained. And if it is noticed, it's not retained for more than, I think they say, 8 to 10 seconds. With an experiential event, you actually retain that information for a longer period of time. And again, the deeper the experience, the more senses you tap into, the longer that information and that experience gets retained. That's why it is so important to tap into all of the senses if you can when you're doing an experiential event. Because again, it kind of hardwires the brain and encodes it in there so that they remember the messages that they're now hearing, and they remember the experience that they had. And so your brand is something that stays with them after they leave that experience. Multi-medium opportunity. Again, I think that we've talked a lot about digital versus experiential kind of in that first section, and we like to look at them not as two very separate things that compete with each other, that when done right, they actually work together. So if you're looking at this quote as far as, not seeing any sort of one medium as a funnel that reaches an endpoint, that's a good way to look at things. That really it's about using kind of that traditional sales funnel, if you will, but things should be funneling from one to the next. So you should be using digital media to promote an event that you're having. When someone comes to the event, there should be digital experiences there, because again, people are naturally living online and digital lives now. So if you don't give them that type of digital experience that is hands-on at an event, you're missing out on an opportunity there, because it is how they live their life. It's what they do every day, and you want to make sure that you're building that affinity through that, kind of creating that habit to use digital and for the brand to reach them through digital. And even traditional advertising, making sure that they're driving to the event. So if you're using digital advertising to drive to the event, to increase kind of that attendance to the event, the other great thing about experiential is that it creates content for brands. So as brands have all of their social channels and YouTube and websites and need to fill all of that up with content on a daily basis, experiential actually allows you to create that content you can capture on site and then share that back out in the digital world. So again, another example of digital and experiential working hand in hand, one leading to the other, which then leads back to the first one. That back and forth conversation becomes really important to build that long-term loyalty with consumers. So transitioning now into measurement, and I think that that is something that every marketer desires. The idea of big data and measurement has become so much more important over the last several years, because we have access to those numbers now. And credit to digital media, they're the ones who really kind of pioneered it over the last several years. The targeting that they can do and the reports that they're able to deliver back as far as who was on a website, how much time they spent on the website, what they looked at, what they clicked around on, who liked something, who shared something on social media. Those kind of engagement numbers, that kind of targeting is really sought after by marketers. And so digital's kind of led the way there, and it's really on experiential agencies and experiential marketing activations to kind of catch up to that, to figure out what are the best ways that we can measure. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that now. If you look at digital measurement, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, that it lacks kind of a little bit of power, because again, what is really the value of an impression? Did someone actually even see something when we're counting it as an impression? And that's one of the issues with digital metrics, is that they still leave a little bit to be desired. That's one of the kind of biggest issues that we have when comparing the two of them. So, if you're looking at the digital media, 50% of pixels, and then again, this is how the Media Rating Council and Internet Advertising Bureau has defined an impression, right? They say 50% of the pixels in the ad must be viewable portion of an internet browser for a minimum of 1 second or 2 seconds for videos to qualify as a viewable display impression. That is how they have defined a display impression. So if you've got a media agency telling you that, hey, we had 100,000 impressions on the homepage yesterday, and then you look at the definition of an impression as only 50% of your ad had to even be viewable for 1 second. Again, do people even really notice that? Is that really a lasting impression? Not even a lasting impression. I don't think that's an impression at all. And so that is, again, one of the challenges within digital media is while they have great measurement numbers and great stats to show, how valuable are those numbers really? And, experiential marketing, quite frankly, doesn't have a whole lot more to brag about. One of the issues that they have is traditionally people haven't done a great job of measuring experiential marketing, and that's something that we've been certainly trying to change over the years and trying to do a much better job of. On top of that, it's really hard to have kind of a standard measurement tool, standard measurement practice, because every experiential event is so different. And your objectives for those events become so different. So, if you're really kind of thinking through that marketing process, as a brand, you want to know what is your objective for the brand. What are you really trying to accomplish for a brand during a time of year or throughout the entire year? Once you know that, then you can figure out which experiential type of activation best benefits you. Sometimes it's sampling, sometimes it's a one-time live event, sometimes it's a mobile tour, sometimes it's in-store demos. There's certainly lots of different experiential activations that may help you accomplish your objectives. But because there's so many different ways of doing that, there's no one standard form of measurement that allows you to track just how effective that is. So with digital advertising, for example, there are display ads, right? That is one very traditional type of ad. And when you think about it, that's really about the only online advertising you do. You've got that just traditional display ad. You've got pre-roll now with video, and then you've got targeted social media ads that kind of pop up in your feed. So again, there's very few ways that you can really reach people through those digital channels when you're looking at advertising. And so it's easy to have kind of a consistent formula because of that narrowness. But with experiential, there's so many different types of activations, so many different types of locations you can have those activations, different amount of consumers that are coming through there. That measurement, there's just kind of no magic bullet to create a formula to measure experiential as a whole. And that's one of the reasons that marketers have always been kind of reluctant, and I think kind of slow to catch up, is they use kind of that complication as an out, right, as an excuse not to do the measurement. So again, no standardized practice, and most of them don't even bother going about it. Looking at social media and kind of the measurement as far as that goes, and kind of what is the value of social media as compared to traditional digital and then experiential. One of the things is that certainly lots of people go through social media, less follow brands. I think the number that there's about 19% kind of follow brands that they're interested in. But really only about 9.5% kind of value the information that they say, or that it actually creates any sort of incentive to purchase. But what does matter within social media is that peer influence, that friends still talk, friends still value each other's opinions. And so social media, when you see your friend talking about a brand, that becomes really, really valuable. Most people tend to turn to their friends for recommendations or to validate a purchase that they're already planning on making. And social media allows that to kind of accelerate much quicker because, again, you are popping up now in people's feeds on their day-to-day lives. And that is really the power of social media when it comes to driving the purchase. And that's what brands are really starting to measure. It's not necessarily the reach that their brand post had or the impressions that their post had, because they happen to pay to make sure it pops up in your feed. They're trying to get better at measuring how are people posting about brands, what kind of influence do those people have, how many people do those people reach, and then seeing what the impact is from purchase there, because again, you can start to track how many people maybe went online and made purchases after seeing their friend talk about it within their social space. Now with experiential, that push to purchase becomes very, very big. We talked a little bit about it earlier that when you have that face-to-face interaction, I think the number I had earlier was you're 83% more likely to kind of value that brand and to want to go out and buy that brand. And going a little bit deeper into those numbers, within a 2015 Event Track survey, you can actually see that that path to purchase and that drive to purchase is even stronger with experiential. So if a person was thinking about a product or thinking about buying a product, if they actually experienced it for themselves, again, whether that's an in-store demo or at a live event, 98% said that they're more likely to buy it. So again, when you're already thinking about buying a product and then you get to kind of try it for yourself, that is really the ultimate deal closer, as you can see. 65%, who maybe weren't necessarily thinking about buying a product, actually end up buying it because they saw it in an event, because they experienced it hand-on, because they had that face-to-face interaction. And then 87% of people actually bought it again. So, if you're looking at that repeat purchase side of things, 65% of people are buying something for the first time because of an event, but then 87% of those people actually repeating that purchase. So an experiential event doesn't get you one purchase, it gets you at least two purchases with people. And again, so that value of experiential becomes so important and so much bigger than I think a lot of people get credit for. And if you look in long term, you got 70% who say they become regular customers. So that's not one purchase, that's not two purchases, that's multiple purchases over several years. And that is, again, when it gets really hard to also calculate kind of that return on experiential. The tracking side of it becomes much more difficult. When you're online, because of cookies and all of the creepy things that people do to track your movements online, you're able to see if someone saw a banner ad, came to your website, clicked through deeper into your website, and then made a purchase. You're able to actually track, did that ad on that one website drive purchase for that person? And then you can actually track that person's purchase behaviors online over time, so you can have a true ROI within that banner ad. With experiential, it's much more complicated and much harder to do. Because when someone walks into an experiential event, there's not a tracking device, that is suddenly inserted into their skin, so you can see where they go after the event, where they go and buy their products after the event, what products they're buying. So that tracking of how many people are really going from the event and buying relies on, again, that survey and people telling us that they're going out and buying those things. Actually tracking them to do those purchases just becomes much more complicated and harder to do. Again, one of those, what I like to call excuses that marketers use for not even bothering to measure them. So, this is a term that has certainly been thrown around for the last 5 or 6 years, not ROI, but ROX, return on experiential, or return on engagement. ROE is another way that we talk about it. And how do you measure that? What is the value of that? A lot of marketers don't even bother measuring it, that they kind of tell themselves, and to some extent they're right, that experiential isn't about sales. It isn't about kind of those statistics that you can show your CEO. Experiential is just about creating that brand affinity and making sure that your brand is getting in front of people, because we know the power of those interactions and how they really create, again, kind of that long-term loyalty. So what that person bought, how much they bought, becomes less important because you know they're having an impact in their lives just by meeting them face to face and kind of meeting them where they are. Dominic Hansen's, again, professor at UCLA, really went kind of deep on ROI and not necessarily a rant, but really kind of doesn't value ROI when it comes to marketing and especially experiential, because it's not really an investment. Marketing is not necessarily an investment. Marketing is something kind of much greater than that. It doesn't fit that description of an investment, and it's really more of an expense. Again, it shouldn't be seen as something that gets you money back. It should be seen kind of more as a P&L line of, we know that we need to spend this money to generate awareness that will lead to sales down the line, but not necessarily that immediate return. So again, if you're looking at ROI in the traditional sense, you would want to measure, if we do this event bring money directly back into our pockets. And again, experiential marketing as a whole is really about that kind of long-term look at how your marketing efforts driving sales over time, not necessarily that day that someone saw or did something. But progress is being made when it comes to measuring engagement. Again, talked about all the reasons it's very difficult to do, but marketers have realized in the last several years that it is becoming important, again, as digital has really paved the way for tracking and for measurement, and being able to show kind of how big data can be used by companies to improve everything that they're doing, including marketing. Experiential agencies have had to finally catch up, and so they are making some progress. You're looking now at a lot of brands are actually, the 60% have started dedicating budget to do measurement. And again, I think a lot of brands are just dipping their toe in the water right now when it comes to measurement, but at least they are setting some money aside for that measurement. 70% say they need to validate the results from sponsorships. This is up from the last several years where people, I think 25% of companies said that they were starting to do that several years ago. Now that's up to almost 70%. So people realize that if you're giving a sports league, for example, a lot of money, you really need to start measuring what kind of value you're getting back from that. There's been some companies that have actually started, when partnering with Major League Baseball companies, or Major League Baseball teams, that the teams are asking for numbers back from those companies. They want to know that, hey, beer brand, if you're sponsoring my team, are you really driving sales at my stadium? Are you doing things that are benefiting me, not just us benefiting you by being able to put our team logo on your point of sale or your advertising? So that conversation's even kind of gone back and forth between sponsors and kind of the brands or the teams that they're sponsoring. 86% of marketers, kind of use the standard practice of for every marketer is, did it drive sales, right? And that's the first thing you're kind of looking at is, did my program, whether experiential or not, did it drive sales? So that becomes the default typically when you're measuring experiential. You can see here 86% kind of default to that, measurement of sales to judge effectiveness. But in that same survey, actually 84% of people favored just increased brand awareness as that primary metric. I think they realize that experiential isn't about driving sales right at that moment. It's about creating that long-term relationship, that lasting relationship that drives sales over time. Again, leading to that idea of repeat purchase. So for them, they really want to know, did our event reach the people that we wanted it to reach? Did it have an emotional kind of impact with them? And if we know if we did that and accomplished that, then the sales will come over time. So they're not kind of as interested in measuring sales. Sales just kind of becomes the default, again, because CFOs and CEOs are certainly looking at those kind of baseline numbers. But I think marketers and good marketers know that awareness and affinity becomes much more important than just sales themselves. We talked about this a little bit earlier as well, but again, when it comes to measuring experiential, objectives vary. Because objectives vary, experiential activations vary. And so again, there's no one formula that is able to solve all of those problems. So every single experiential event, again, whether it's a year-long event or a one-time event, almost requires a custom formula. And that really requires brands and their agencies to work together to figure out, what are the objectives? So what kind of experiential event are we going to do to reach those objectives? And then what are our KPIs going to be to kind of measure success of that program? And once you know those KPIs, you can figure out what are the actual things that you need to measure. What are the interaction points or the impressions or the engagements or the samples that you need to measure to create the formula, to get the KPIs, and then judge success overall of the program. But each one of them almost has to be custom done. So it does create a lot of work and a lot of effort, again, for both agencies and brands to get to that point, which is why a lot of people don't do it, because it does take work. It does take effort. It does take some thinking. It does take a little bit extra versus just having one standard formula you can plug some numbers into. And I think a lot of marketers have used that as another reason to not even do measurement. That really they just want to be able to say, we know that it's creating awareness and that's good enough for me. But again, leadership within brands, within companies are looking for numbers to certainly justify, is experiential really adding value for my brand? Is it adding to our bottom line? And so that's where measurement has now started to take off over the last several years, is justifying the purpose of experiential. People can no longer fall back on just saying, hey, we know it's important because it's important. They need to show the numbers of why it's important, how it's really affecting them. I've probably said this several times already, and I will say it 1,000 times a day to the people that I work with, but experiential is all about emotion. And again, getting people to be moved emotionally. And if you're able to do that, then it's going to create movement for your brand. So again, Bruce Henderson at Jack Morton said this years ago, but if your brand experience doesn't move people emotionally, it's not working as hard as it could or should be. Experiential is not about a headline, a quick awareness play. It's about creating real feelings in people. And when you have people's attention in person and you're not making them feel something and having an emotional reaction, then you're honestly probably not being very effective with what it is that you're doing. So what should you be measuring? What are those, kind of benchmarks, if you will, when it comes to, measuring experiential, digital, traditional advertising? That is something that we want to look at now. There's a book called Innovative Marketing Communications by Emma Wood and Guy Masterson, and they identified, from an experiential standpoint, kind of the 7 I's. And that is involvement, interaction, immersion, intensity, individuality, innovation, and integrity. So these are, again, some of those benchmarks, some of those kind of objectives or KPIs that they recommend brands really look at when it comes to experiential. So you talk about involvement. Again, it's not just did someone come to the event in the sense of involvement, but how emotionally involved do they become with the brand? And again, interaction isn't just about they picked up your product, but it was, did they pick up your product? How long did they pick up your product? Did they talk to a brand ambassador? How engaged were they with that brand ambassador? How much time did they spend there? Again, interaction can go much deeper than that. And that's really what the challenge is with the 7 I's is not just what they mean on the surface level, but how can you go deeper with each one of those things? So when it comes to metrics, again, kind of based on those 7 I's, we want to go deeper. With digital, an impression, as I kind of defined it earlier, if you want to even call it an impression, is someone barely noticing and or not noticing your banner ad at all. So, the impression has no quality, as I think I kind of alluded to. But with experiential, you don't want to just measure an impression. You don't just want to measure that someone noticed that you had an event, because that's what I would call an impression. You want to know what that quality of the impression was. And so from a metric standpoint, you should actually be setting kind of a range, a scale of quality of an impression. So let's say you have a 10 by 10 tent at a much larger event. A low quality impression is someone saw your tent from 200 feet away. They didn't come over to it. They didn't interact with the brand at all, but they happened to see your tent, right? That is a low quality impression. Now, a high quality impression is they saw the tent, they walked over, they walked in the tent, and then they spent some time in order to kind of learn more about the brand, about the product, about what you're doing at that event. So that is a very high quality impression. So again, setting even that scale of low to high quality impressions allows you to really assess the value of being at that event. And you'll see that kind of continually throughout with these potential metrics is don't just look at surface level analytics, go deeper with everything that you're doing. Again, so the quality of the data that you're capturing. Again, if you're looking at an impression online, for example, that's not really quality data because it doesn't mean that someone actually noticed that banner ad. So you really want to look at the quality of the data that you're capturing. How reliable is it? How in-depth is it? How honest are people being? Again, even establishing measures for the quality of that data becomes really important because it makes sure that you are setting your goals out properly and actually planning on how to capture the right kind of data at the event. I think the idea of planning to capture data is really, really important. Again, it becomes an afterthought as brands start to say, oh yeah, I guess we need some metrics to make sure that this was successful. They don't think through what kind of metrics they need, and then more importantly, how are we actually going to capture those metrics? So thinking through all of those things from start to finish is going to allow you to really assess the true value of an experiential event and the true impact that it has. But if you're not thinking through and planning how to capture all of that data, again, you're going to lose a lot of that insight that you're looking for. So again, just some of these potential metrics that you're going to want to take a look at over time, not just for a one-time event, but you want to look at it from events year over year, year-long events, and try to look at what the trends are like for your brands and for experiential events over time. Getting into, again, a little bit deeper within the idea of measurement, I'm going to read this quote out loud just because I think there's a lot of value in it. Experiential and digital work very well together, and great success has been realized by brands that have connected an offline activation to an online element and vice versa. It's important to remember that today's society congregates in both offline and online social communities. This reality makes it vital to create seamless integrations between both programs to serve a common goal and objective. And I really want to, again, touch on this a second time. I know I talked about it earlier. I'm not trying to fit this presentation as an experiential versus digital, as a battle that is combative and that it's one or the other. When a brand is doing it right, when a brand is being kind of as efficient as they can be and as successful as they can be, they are doing both, but they're not doing both in silos. They're doing both in the same silo so that they're complementing each other. Again, digital driving to experiential, experiential creating content that can be shared back on digital, having digital experiences at the experiential event because that's the nature of people, that they're used to experiencing things kind of in the digital form now. If those two things are not working together, then you're never going to reach kind of that bigger objective for a brand. So while I'm certainly spending a lot of time talking about experiential versus digital, the kind of mecca of it would be using them together, that they should be complementary from one another, not competitive. So some of the key takeaways, hopefully, that you guys are walking away from this presentation is, again, kind of the pros and cons of online, the pros and cons of experiential. Really, the biggest kind of con online is the quality of impressions, the quality of engagements, the quality of click-throughs. All of these things matter. We can show metrics of here's what the impressions were, here's what the click-through rate was, here's how much time they spent on site. But there's just so many flaws in those metrics that you don't really know what the quality of them are. And that's kind of the biggest con of online advertising. It does have the benefit of generating awareness kind of at an efficient rate. But again, how much quality is really within that kind of awareness that you're generating. Lots of people click on banner ads by mistake because their website was loading too slow and they were trying to click on a link to another article, for example, but as they did that, the website loaded and they actually clicked on the banner ad. So that comes through as a click-through rate, but it's not necessarily a quality metric because whoever clicked through on that immediately closed out the window and went back to what they were doing. People can go to home pages and it may look like they're sitting there for 3 minutes on that website when really all it is they had the browser open while someone came over to talk to them at their desk and they got distracted. And so while it shows people are spending 3 minutes on our homepage, that's not really a quality metric because we don't know what they're really doing during those 3 minutes. And again, experiential certainly has its cons as well. The biggest one is kind of those hard and fast metrics I talked about, that there's no one formula magic bullet to measure experiential, that there's so many things that you have to think about when measuring your event or your tour or your sampling or your in-store demo, that it becomes really complicated and really hard. Again, it just kind of takes that effort. So, that is really kind of that biggest con is, putting the effort forth to develop those formulas. I think the other biggest con, and this is something that, we have certainly noticed as well, we're able to show how many people came to an event. We're able to show maybe how much time people spent in the footprint of the event. We're able to do survey data so we can kind of get a sense of who was at the event, the types of demographics, that were there, and then through the survey, kind of get their feelings for the brand, the event, the products, and again, get those learnings. But tracking that person from the event to the store to see if they actually made a purchase and then made multiple purchases over time, that is something that is really hard, if not impossible to do. We've tried to work with a lot of brands to give us their retail data, a month out from us doing an experience in their market, and then looking at what were the sales like days leading up to the event, the weekend of the event, the days after the weekend event, and then looking at sales a month after the event, is no longer being activated, so that we can at least track to some extent, are we driving sales within that market with what we're doing? But like I said, because you can't track anyone from the event specifically to the store, it's really hard to know if the people that you're influencing are going out and buying immediately or buying long-term. And research shows that they're likely buying long-term, but there's no way to measure that actually, and that's why, they're kind of the biggest con within experiential marketing and the measurement that goes along with it. So again, getting into kind of just that difference between advertising, digital advertising, traditional advertising, experiential, it's okay that they're measuring impressions when it comes to digital advertising, for example, because that's part of the point of it. Advertising is really about, giving attention to, driving attention towards. That is an awareness type of measurement. Advertising is about awareness. It's about getting people to know that your brand even exists. So that is definitely what they should be measuring. But experiential is about, again, gaining knowledge. When you look at kind of the traditional definition, coming from the Latin word experientia, it is about gaining that knowledge, and that is something you should really be thinking about when it comes to experiential. So if you're measuring experiential, don't measure necessarily the awareness, the impressions, the experiential. Try to measure the knowledge that people gained. Did they actually have product understanding and brand understanding after coming to your activation? That just shows really that difference between advertising and experiential. So at the end of the day, again, I'm certainly going to be pushing experiential over digital. Within this presentation, again, they should be working together, but the power of experiential, I think, is taken for granted, which is why we're focusing so much on it within this conversation. When you're looking at experiential versus digital, think about, as you're trying to decide what types of activations to do, where to put your marketing dollars, do you want to just create awareness for your brand, or do you want them to actually have full understanding of your brand? If you're just trying to get their attention and get them to know you exist, then you may want to put some more dollars within digital media and digital marketing. But if you want people to understand your brand, to start building affinity towards your brand and have kind of emotional feelings and emotional reactions towards your brand, then you want to put your money in experiential, because that is certainly what that brings to life and what that's able to create within people. And, when I look at digital media, I as a brand am not really satisfied, which is kind of a general glance in our direction. I think that's what I consider, when you go back to something like a display ad or scrolling through a social media feed, that if I even notice that your ad is there, I'm quickly flipping through it. And so again, I consider it like a general glance in my direction. And if I'm a brand, I don't want to glance in my direction. I want someone to see me from across the room and then take the time to walk across that room and engage me in a conversation. And that's how we look at all of our experiential events. It's how can we get people to notice us and then to, again, make that decision to walk over, to come to us, and to have that face-to-face conversation. So that is all I got for you today. I would love to take any questions that you have, anything I can expand on for you.
Great. Thanks, Josh. And there's been a ton of questions that have come in of a number of varying topics. So the first one that I would ask, or that came in, was what are the best ways to ensure a positive first impression when running an experiential event or a field marketing campaign?
Well, I think there's two things that I would look at. I'm gonna talk about it from kind of the 100 feet out to in the actual event space itself. So from 100 feet out, you're trying to make that first impression through your graphics, right? And through the physical space that you have, the things that are getting people's attention to even invite them over. So, making sure that, you are using good design tactics, right? And kind of that good design eye to get people's attention to bring your brand to life. That is that first impression from a distance. So it's a, difference between kind of wearing like sweatpants and a raggedy t-shirt versus wearing kind of nicer jeans and a button-up shirt. You want to make sure that you're getting people's attention by presenting yourself in the best way possible. And then once they get into the footprint, really it's about the people that are representing your brand within that footprint. So again, brand ambassadors. We spend a lot of time when it comes to hiring brand ambassadors that we don't, just use staffing agencies to try to get people through headshots and into the space. We actually spend a ton of time interviewing and then actually hiring all of our brand ambassadors at Switch so that we have real control over the value that they are adding and the quality of the ambassadors that we use, because we know that, again, that conversation that they have with someone is so valuable and so important and create such an impact over time that we want to make sure the right people are creating that first impression. So making sure that you're spending a lot of time evaluating your brand ambassadors to make sure they're properly representing your brand is the other way to create that great first impression.
Cool, thank you. So if you have a limited budget, what are some strategies for companies to help determine what percentage they should be spending on online or digital versus experiential? You have any advice there?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it at the end. What I would look at is your objectives of the brand as a whole. Are your objectives to create awareness about your brand? Are your objectives to get people to have more affinity towards your brand? Are your objectives to just drive sales for the brand? Are your objectives to get people to understand what your brand even does? Those are all very different things. So I would start there. Once you know what your objectives are, you can get a much better idea of how to kind of spend that budget, how to divide that budget. If no one even knows your brand exists and you just have to create that awareness, you're probably going to put a little bit more money in that digital space. Again, there's certainly an efficiency with the budget there to try to get your brand out in front of as many people as possible. But if you're more worried about creating kind of affinity for your brand, or let's say you have a product that's a CPG product, right? That's a food-based product, and you know that once people taste the brand, that they're going to fall in love with it. So brand awareness may not be your biggest issue because people may know about your brand, but it doesn't mean they actually want to taste it for themselves. But you know that once they do taste it, their instant reaction is going to be, that is delicious, I can't wait to buy this and buy this all the time. In that case, you're going to definitely want to do an experiential event. You're going to put a lot of your money in that experiential and that sampling tactic because you know that that is what's most important for your brand, is getting kind of the, the food into people's mouths. So just starting with those objectives is going to give you kind of the clearest path as far as where you should be spending that money.
Great. Well, we got time for just a couple more questions. You showed one of your slides in there, showed a bunch of metrics that people could begin tracking. What advice would you give people to begin tracking those metrics, and how do you guys keep track of everything? Since every event is somewhat different, what would you recommend to begin keeping track of all of those?
Well, we use, Shane, as you know, we use Okapi to do a lot of our tracking when we get to work with our clients and kind of recommend the tools that we use, just because it's a very kind of centralized software and platform that allows me to take a lot of different information and keep it in one place. So that's kind of a tool that we use to collect data, to manage data, to keep it in one place, be able to look at it in one place. But I think whether it's Okapi or there's certainly lots of other tools out there that will help you do that, making sure that you have that tool that makes it easy to collect and then access data becomes really, really important. And you want to make sure that's easy for everyone to see, from a brand ambassador to a brand manager, to a creative director, an account manager, to the agency themselves. Because if you're all looking at the numbers, you can all talk about them together and really kind of have those shared learnings and figure out what adjustments you need to make. I think that's the other value of data, is that with experiential, kind of like digital, you can see what's working and not working, and if you're nimble, you can actually make adjustments kind of in real time. You don't have to, with an ad campaign, there's a TV commercial that's out there, and you spend $1 million in the TV commercial, and then millions of dollars, getting it onto broadcast, and someone doesn't like the commercial. Well, it's really hard to go and shoot another commercial really, really quickly and put a different commercial online the next day based on the feedback. But with digital and experiential, you can be more nimble, and you actually can make those adjustments. So again, capturing that data and allowing everyone to look at it together is really, really important. And I'll go back to what I was saying a second ago as well. Just the planning of it is really the most important thing of all. So figuring out what are your KPIs that you're going to use to measure your overall objectives and the success of a program. Once you know the KPIs, you can then figure out what type of, what kind of data do you need. So let's say a KPI is cost per sample, for example. Well, if cost per example is going to be my KPI, then I need to know how many samples have I handed out and what is the total cost of each one of the events that I did, and I can figure out the cost per sample all the way down to the event. So if I know that's my KPI and I know that that's what I need to track, I can then get a tool like Okapi, for example, that would allow me to track the samples distributed, the total cost for the event, display for me what the cost per sample for that event was. Then I can compare that cost per sample for that event versus the other events that I'm doing, and over time kind of track where am I most successful, where am I getting the best bang for my buck, what kind of market should I be visiting. So again, if you're using that planning process properly, you figure out KPIs, you know what data you need, then you can figure out which tool is best for you.
Great. So one more question, any advice for selling experiential to the C-suite or getting more dollars allocated to your budget to focus more on experiential?
You know, one thing that we have found successful, and I'm not saying it's easy to do, because it is certainly not based on the time or lack thereof that C-suite has, but giving them an experience for themselves tends to be the most powerful thing. That when you can get that executive to come to an event that maybe you are throwing or maybe someone else is throwing, it doesn't really matter. We get them to attend that event and able to actually kind of point out what is happening there, what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening front of house, you know, kind of pointing out the pluses and minuses of those events. That's where we have found the most impact, where people are just like, holy cow, that is amazing. Here's a real, I'll say this is a industry secret in the sense of a kind of a switch secret that I shouldn't really be sharing, but I'm going to anyway. Something that we found really effective is actually inviting your client down to something like South by Southwest. So South by Southwest, that first week is considered a digital conference. And so any marketer who wants to learn and see digital in action and see what's the coolest, newest digital stuff, they're going to South by Southwest. That's the place to be. So as an agency, if you're again a good agency partner with your clients, you can get the C-suite to come down to South by Southwest with you to learn about digital. But anyone who's ever been to South by Southwest knows that what brands are doing down there is activating experiential. That every footprint, every square foot of Austin suddenly turns into an experiential event. That you can see tents and Ferris wheels and giant claw games from Google. All of those things are now being activated at South by Southwest. So you're now with a CMO or a CEO that you're working with because you want to learn about experiential, but now you can walk them into, or they want to talk about digital, but now you can walk them into an experiential footprint and show them just how powerful that is. So that is actually something I've done with a couple of clients in the past to kind of, I don't want to say trick them into learning and seeing experiential in action, but I've been able to kind of kill two birds with one stone in that sense.
That's great advice. Well, Josh, thanks so much for taking time today. Everybody on the screen can see your contact information and how to get a hold of you at Switch. If you have any questions, if anybody out there has any questions about Okapi, my contact information is up there as well. Please reach out to either one of us to help answer any questions, or if you want to know more about Switch's products and services or those of Okapi's. Thanks for everybody for joining us, and Josh, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.